So in an attempt to continue to communicate the kinds of ideas that we have found interesting here over the last few years of our conversation, I think it would be useful as a motif to utilize the vehicle of a historic understanding of piracy and pirate philosophy as our kind of central touchstone for why it is that we investigate the ideas that we do and why the concerns that we find important are as important as they are. It's important to look at the golden age of piracy, perhaps the 16 and 1700s, through a lens that involves a great deal of context. We are looking at an era of extreme colonial expansion, extreme profiteering, a tremendous amount of warfare, violence, an extreme level of conflict between various and competing interests. And the common man was really caught up in that grist mill. Now, it's important to understand that the reactionary individual that may have found themselves as a quote-unquote pirate during this era was an individual typically that had faced tremendous oppression at the hands of hierarchical authority, whether that meant you were an escaped slave, an escaped naval ordinary from one of the various European navies around the world. Perhaps you'd escaped as a mestizo from desperate plantation life in Central or South America. It's important to understand that the individuals who took up this lifestyle did so because they were incredibly dispossessed. You do find within piracy some examples of expatriate intellectuals who did not come from those dispossessed classes, but they chose to involve themselves in these projects because they were dispossessed with any kind of camaraderie within their own circle or sphere of influence, meaning that they had values that simply were not congruent with the establishment, and they felt compelled to try another way of living. And I would also add here, it is not particularly important to get into quibbles about how historic various accounts of piracy really are, or whether or not the historic record is particularly accurate. While that's a concern, it's more important to understand that in this motif, whether they're literary fabrications or conceits or not, or whether they are actually historic accounts, we are seeing the arising of a liberty, fraternity, equality mindset that was a very, very, very bottom-up, left-leaning, egalitarian movement, a desperate one, a tremendously desperate one, a primitive one, a crude one. But in many ways it represents the spear tip of a particular kind of thinking that became very influential in Western civilization, at least for a couple of centuries. We are back to, in my mind, a kind of world that in many ways resembled and made necessary the kind of reactionary strategies that we might have seen among pirates in the 1700s. I do believe that the individual who values liberty, fraternity, and equality and wants to seek a life of hope and freedom as an independent player without a reliance on hierarchical authority, I believe that individual will need to also adopt relatively desperate strategies in a hope to disengage from social structures that one finds difficult, if not abhorrent. So often living within civilization, especially colonialist, expansionist civilization, one finds oneself at odds with the conventional narrative. It often goes, you are either with us or against us. You have to be on this side of the fence or the other side of the fence. The pirate, or at least the neo-pirate that I'm going to advocate here, doesn't see it that way. They don't want to live in a world where you have to choose which side of the fence you want to live on. You want to live in a world without fences. You want to live as a autonomous, empowered individual on your own terms, taking responsibility for your own actions, and in whatever manner you see fit with the people that you care about. Remarkable how revolutionary an idea that happens to be at this moment. In a lot of ways, it does resemble values that are spontaneously and emergent from within civilization that do mirror traditional values within indigenous communities, and that's no accident. It's no accident. We do have some of us have an innate hunger for connection with the natural world and our fellow man, and a depth and authenticity to that cannot be found within the constraints of the civilizational process. My message here is to reach out for those people who are as uncomfortable with that as I, and we will see as we go along here how many people that actually resonates with. Cheers.